Chapter 9, King of the Killers. Without a rep to control our tank, we had to rely on the key holder, a prospective Aryan Brotherhood member housed in the next unit, to check inmate violations. We couldn't see him through the steel doors, but his voice thundered through the cracks. He had loyal spies. Failure to follow the key holder's orders had deadly consequences. As we lined up at our tables, one Hispanic inmate stood across from me, arms folded across his chest, jaw jutted in defiance. Though dark-skinned, he insisted he was white because he spoke white, and in truth, it was easier to be white in a murder unit simply because the woods had fewer numbers and fewer opportunities to mess up. But more than rejecting his own race, the Hispanic white inmate renounced his allegiance to the Southsiders, aka Serrano, a group for which he still wore the tattoo on his back. The inmate had disrespected both races. He needed more than a correction. The Southsiders rep planned to jump him. He issued orders to each Hispanic in the tank to punch the inmate at least once in the head. The Woods too were expected to participate, but without a rep, someone had to take control. I banged on the steel door in the day room. "Give me the key holder," I said. Within minutes, a deep, disembodied voice ordered a beating. At my command, bullets emerged from the corners and ushered the Hispanic white inmate into a cell behind the stairs, a blind spot where deputies had no visual access. The cell doors opened with an old-fashioned key and often just stayed open. The inmate protested mildly, whined that the rules were stupid, that he could be white if he wanted to be white. Who were we to decide? Maybe he had a point. Several Hispanics pummeled the inmate with sharp blows to his stomach. Wired and frenzied, they followed their punches with kicks to the head. Blood flew from the inmate's nose onto their orange shoes. He rolled onto his side, moaned, sputtered, and clutched his head. He rocked into a fetal position, his hair sticky with sweat and blood, his back slapping the concrete wall behind him. Anger exploded in the inmates' faces. "Get up," one ordered, but the Hispanic white inmate refused. Another kicked him in the back of his head, and I heard a loud crack. A small crowd formed around the perimeter of the open cell. The beating had become a spectator sport. The Woods each took a swing at the slumped-over inmate. I worried that the man might die. He struggled to stand and glared at me with dark, wet eyes. I extended my hand. He gave it a weak shake. The Southside rep shook the inmate's hand too. "It's cool," he said, and just like that, order was restored to the tank. Later, we learned that the inmate actually had mental issues. He was slow. Maybe he really thought he was white after all. "I should be the new rep," Jan announced later as we lay in the dark listening to the clank of metal and the drip of water. "I've been in this hole the longest." "You should apply," I encouraged him, knowing our tank needed a replacement rep. No one else jockeyed for the job. The rep typically incurred additional charges. He had to commit or supervise assaults or risk being killed. Jan had 2 years in the tank and a flash temper and brute force that matched his frame. Perfect. But the key holder had other ideas. He nominated me. "You," Jan bristled. He paced our small cell, chewed the inside of his lower lip, and made a sucking sound that grated my nerves. "What makes you so special?" I lay back on the cot, clasped my arms behind my head, and closed my eyes, but Jan's voice droned as he recounted his crime. Virgin, blowjob, stabbed 33 times. "When I get out of here, I'm going to be a serial killer," Jan repeated. By now, I had enough of Jan and his career aspirations. "Listen to me." I sat up, swung my legs over the cot, and rubbed my hands through my hair. "What's the matter with you?" Jan stopped pacing. A spider crawled across his foot, and in a flash, he snatched it between his fingers and dangled it upside down by its legs. "You're not ever getting out," I promised, my voice a tight whisper. "What do you know about it?" His pale eyes pinned me in the dark, unsettling and cold, like the steady gaze of a fly. "You murdered a woman brutally." I restated the obvious. "She deserved it." Jan crushed the spider between his fingers, and his bulbous belly burst. "If you brag to me one more time about wanting to be a serial killer, I'm going to kill you." As the designated rep, I checked people every 3 days. Mostly, the violations involved words exchanged between the races, jeers or insults mouthed through the glass. I also reviewed new arrivals' papers to make sure they had been classified correctly. I paced, wired by lack of sleep and heightened awareness, knowing if I missed in the front, if a check went unpunished, my inaction could spark a prison riot. I had some perks, my own table in the day room, extra food, I was king of the killers. Each morning, I led the woods in mandatory exercise, 400 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, like a general preparing the soldiers for war. Actually, it helped me pass the time, and meanwhile, 20 feet across from us in the day room, the Hispanics chanted their own battle cry, Big Bad Soups, Serranos, Southern California, Mexicans. I gave geriatrics and inmates suffering from drug withdrawals a pass. Once the steel doors buzzed open, each inmate had 2 minutes to scramble to his place in line and drop to the floor for push-ups. But there were always inmates who refused. One would in particular perpetually missed his workouts. The steel door to his cell buzzed shut after 2 minutes, and he stared at me through the glass, a wry smile plastered on his face. Maybe he was testing me. When his cell door reopened 2 hours later, I hovered in the entrance, arms folded, wary of the game. You know the rules. What if I don't like the rules? I'm going to have to check you, I said, and I knew he was in trouble. Independent thinking had no place in the tank, no place in the game, no place in the real world. I felt sorry for him. He was part of a cycle. He challenged, I disciplined. And if I deterred, someone else would discipline me. War operated in the same fashion. Good, decent people could not exist in this environment. It was the natural order of things. The inmate lowered his head, nodded, and accepted his punishment. When? Tomorrow after lunch. The next day, the inmate surrendered his fate behind the stairs. Woods punched him for 30 seconds in the stomach. A few days later, the same inmate did it again, and the steel doors buzzed shut. He remained asleep, curled on his side. Back to the day room. Again, I ordered the bullets to beat him. I can't stay in here much longer, I advised Kaz over the phone. It's just a matter of time before I get more charges. We can pull you out right now, Kaz said. I stalled. Let me get to the preliminary hearing. There was no rush. Not really. The ATF wasn't paying me for my services. It didn't cost them any money being incarcerated. In fact, Kaz confided to me once that I was the cheapest investigation his agency had ever funded. Had I been a government agent, the stint in jail would have ended far sooner. The same Wood emerged flushed with sweat from beneath the stairs after his third beating in 2 days. Undeterred, committed yet another violation. He shoveled in a few bites of runny mush, then pushed his plate aside and left the table before the others finished eating. I scraped back my chair and blocked his exit. What's the matter with you? The inmate, tall and skinny, with a zipper tattoo across his skull, sucked in his breath and shrugged. These rules are stupid. The other Woods at the table watched me intently. Their plastic forks paused mid-bite. Instinct propelled me, and I headbutted the inmate hard, split open the thin flesh on his scalp, and tore the length of one eyebrow. Stunned, the inmate fell backward. A whimper escaped his lips. My heart raced. I hadn't meant to attack in the open, in front of the blacks and Hispanics, in plain view of the deputies. But my impulsive act produced the effect I wanted. The inmate grabbed his forehead. Blood seeped through cracks between his fingers. Other inmates quickly dispersed, all of us mindful that at any given moment, a deputy could enter and we would all be in trouble. Go back to your cell and stay there for a couple of days, I ordered. Both of us knew better than to report the other. My head throbbed from the assault. I was sure the inmate needed stitches, but that wasn't going to happen. He held a rag to his head and shuffled into his cell. With one eye swollen shut, he glared at me through the other, blinked back blood, and nodded. We understood the unspoken rules. 2 days later, the black deputy eyed the damaged Wood suspiciously. The inmate's face looked bruised and shiny, his eyes still swollen shut. What happened to you? The deputy sneered and stood inches from his face. My own head still throbbed from the gash in my forehead. I fell down the stairs. The inmate played the game. Sure you did. The deputy glanced down the line at all of us, looking for cracks in our expression for signs of slippage. We all stood stoic, eyes straight ahead, the code of silence in full force. A few days later, a Hispanic inmate who called himself Beast motioned me over, said he wanted to speak in private. I know who you are, he whispered, his accent thick. I knew who he was too, a triple murderer. I had read about Beast in the local paper before my incarceration. He was a drug dealer who had gunned down several of his cousins' problems in the confines of his own garage. Unfortunately, Beast had also inadvertently shot and killed his own cousin. His pronouncement jolted me, but there was no way he could know who I really was. He looked at me with small flat eyes and asked simply, "What do I have to do to be a Vago?" I couldn't believe it. Beast actually wanted a prospect. He wanted me to sponsor him. I couldn't imagine how I would accomplish that given the confines of the murder unit, but it would play well with the Vagos, especially since Psycho had lost control of his tank and had renounced his own gang. He had not been asked to be the rep. Vinny, I cupped the phone to my ear later in the day room. He now served as the vice president of the Victorville chapter, the second oldest chapter in the Vagos history and the birthplace of the Hells Angels, the first chapter. B says he wants to be a Vago prospect. That motherfucker's in there with you? He's hardcore. Vinny deferred to me, and I suddenly realized the clout I had with the club. I sponsored Beast. But I couldn't really order him around, not the way a true Vago prospect would be ordered to serve. That would only incite a race riot. Beast had to remain a predator for his own survival. Still, Beast enjoyed the idea of being my prospect. I had a natural rapport with him, having grown up in a Hispanic barrio. Plus, Beast and I had drug dealing in common. The Woods and Hispanics were considered allies against the blacks. Having a prospect slave like Beast at my command bolstered my image in the eyes of my fellow Woods as well as the Vagos. Practically, I knew there was no chance Beast would ever emerge on the outside. He faced a triple life sentence and would likely rot in prison. The night Beast became my official prospect, a riot erupted in the tank next to mine. The commotion began, as all fights did in the murder unit, over race. A black inmate disrespected Hispanic, and the Hispanics forced to retaliate, attacked with fists and makeshift shanks, knives carved out of toothbrushes, razor blades melted into pins. Dark stripped away the inmate's toughness, left them raw and exposed. Sounds morphed into wails, pain, anguish, yelps, cries that retched through steel. Latches opened, and through the small portal, deputies hurled grenades into the cell. They contained tiny rubber balls that smacked the skin like bullets, traveling at speeds of 400 miles an hour. Like being hit with a baseball bat, Jan described. The day room filled with smoke. My eyes smarted. I watched an inmate get stuck in the ass, fall to his knees, and sob from the pain. This happens sometimes, Jan breathed, his face too close to mine through the portal. His lips were chapped, and a small row of pimples formed around the edges. Fucking animals. And it struck me that brutality was human, that each of us had savage impulses we contained and civilized rules we aimed to follow to redirect our primal instinct in a productive task. A person's desire to kill, for instance, could be channeled into a desire to hunt. Slaughtering a deer or a pig was acceptable if the animal provided nourishment, but killing for thrill was just plain murder. And here, in these cells, inmates concerned only with their own base desires became unable to see each other as human beings. The more beatings they endured, the easier it became for them to harm and kill each other. Mistreatment facilitated the process of dehumanization. It was only a matter of time before they turned on one another. By my third week as the rep, I had upgraded to commissary food, M&Ms, and ramen noodles. As I checked each new arrival's paperwork to make sure he had been properly classified in his tank, I noticed a lump curled on a mattress, bolt in the day room. We had no cells available. Twist slept, knees to his chest, on a bald pad in the middle of the floor. His skin had a bluish tint, and he looked like he had suffered from drug withdrawal. There were the odds that Twist would be thrown in my tank. I tapped on my cell window to get his attention. "Hey, dude." He opened one hooded eye and shuddered. "Want some M&Ms?" I waved the bag at him. His lips curled into a crooked smile and he shook his head. "What are you in there for?" I hoped it wasn't for another murder. Kaz had ensured that Twist's original charges had been dropped. Still, I knew eventually I would have to testify against Twist. That fact never bothered me. I always knew my job. The line between gangster and hero never blurred. I had no love for Twist or what he represented. Prison was just a revolving door for damaged people like him. The Vagos, like any outlaw gang, backed their own because they loved to fight. Loyalty, brotherhood. Code had nothing to do with it. Respect was just another word for fear. Members bragged that they could always count on their Vago brothers to bail them out. But it was an illusion. It was all bullshit. Felon in possession, Twist mumbled, and he spent the next 2 days asleep. And then I heard about Bernard, a Mexican drug dealer housed in a nearby federal facility, who faced 25 years minimum in prison. Thanks to me, his case circulated in the papers. It was a case I had worked before ever infiltrating the Vagos. His trial loomed in the weeks ahead. I planned to testify against Bernard, but as long as I remained in the murder unit, my identity could be revealed, my cover blown, my life taken. It wouldn't take long before he learned through pretrial discovery my information, my exact cell and unit, my affiliation with the Vagos, and Bernard wouldn't need a contract. I shivered in the dark, listening intently to the chains rattle metal. A large clock in the deputy's tower ticked the hours. Nearly midnight, and I sensed Bernard's presence like an amputated limb. He knew I was in the murder unit. Paranoia settled in. I imagined the Hispanics emptying their cells, blowing into mine like a harsh wind, knocking my head into the wall, carving me up with their knives. Worrying chipped at my resolve. Each time the cells opened, I anticipated the deadly assault, hapless to stop it, but determined to end my days fighting. He'll kill me if he finds out I'm here, I told Kaz. He's tight with the Mexican Mafia. He never became a member of that prison gang, easily one of the most brutal and ruthless in existence. Bernard didn't need to join La M. He was a millionaire drug dealer who didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. If he wanted me dead, he only needed to name his price, and there was no way I would ever testify against a Mexican Mafia member. The prosecutor wants to interview you for Bernard's case, Kaz said. I absorbed the news with dread. If I'm singled out and the only one taken from my cell, I'll just attract suspicion. What do you suggest? I hesitated, knew my only option. Put me in the hole. The next day, Kyle's made sure 15 of us reps moved cells. By relocating all of us at once, she ensured my safety. I would not be singled out. I would not arouse any suspicion. Beast grunted a sincere goodbye, mumbled something about seeing me soon on the outside. Hardcore gangsters hugged me in succession. They wrapped clumsy arms around my shoulders. Some knuckle punched my fist. Even Jan looked genuinely sad. I felt like a celebrity walking the gauntlet, shaking hands, making false promises, hoping to see them each again. The inmates parted the way from me like I was Moses leaving my people. I went to solitary confinement.